So, as I say, a very warm welcome to part 2 of Living Stones for a Living Church, our Buildings Forum webinar this evening. It's lovely to see so many of you with us and giving up your evening for this. We have two keynote speakers this evening. We have Mike Hart, who's the Transformation Director for North West Synod. He was with us at the first session and gave some really interesting insights, and so we're going to be hearing from him. And also Beki Winter from Faith in Affordable Housing, and she's going to talk about mission and ministry and practice, and particularly where it concerns our building, and she'll be talking in the second half. So we're very warm welcome to them, and as I say to all of you, and the Buildings Forum team will be keeping an eye on everything. And as always, we ask you to use the chat if you can for any reflections, any thoughts, any pointers for us, which we, just to reassure you, we do then look at following the sessions and input into our future work. So thank you for that. Shall we start this evening by, I'm going to have a Bible reading this evening as well as a short prayer. We're in this slightly just past Pentecost period. And I've always loved this passage, and for lots of reasons, but straight after Pentecost, when Christ's followers were all gathering together and working out how to sort of constitute themselves, as it were, how to work out what life should be about. So it's from a very, very familiar passage to lots of us, Acts chapter 2, from verse 42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together, and they had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Amen. I love that passage because it gives me a warm feeling inside about that. Those early apostles, those early disciples, trying to make sense of what was going on in their lives. But it always gives me a sort of wry smile with a contrast of what a lot of our church life actually looks like. It doesn't say anywhere that somebody chaired a meeting or they had to fill out safeguarding or GDPR forms or any of that stuff. They didn't seem to be bothered too much about theology or about, wrestling. They just sat in the presence of God and in one another's presence in that welcoming way and reached out to others. So I love it. And sometimes we just need a little refocus, don't we? So just before we get started and I hand over to Mike, I just wanted us to pray together. Almighty God, help us to sit at the feet of Jesus and to learn which way to go. Guide us in building up and encouraging our own church communities and lead us out into the world around us to join you in its transformation. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you to Mike for being with us again this evening, and I'm going to, without any further ado, hand over to you.
I'm Mike Hart. I'm the Transformation Director, as Lindsay said, of the Northwestern Synod. I've just completed 6 years as the Northwestern Synod's Treasurer, so I've been very involved in Synod life since 2018, and I was a local church treasurer for 10 years before that. So I bring both perspectives. One of the things I want to do is to start by just reflecting a bit on where we are as a synod and some of our journey in the light of some of the conversations we had in part 1 before I talk more specifically about our strategy of church with the people at the margins and its implications for our use of buildings as a resource. So we're a synod of 104 churches, which for ministry are grouped into 11 missional partnerships. So normally between about 8 and 12 churches in each missional partnership. In most cases, at full deployment, served by at least 2 ministers. We've been on a journey since before my time as treasurer, where we have sought to invest resources released by the sale of closed churches and the sale of a large surplus of manses in the synod back into local churches. Some of that is in practical steps. We give grants. We employ a number of staff around supporting churches in areas of property, safeguarding, and we also employ 3 mission mentors who are there to work with churches in looking at the whys and the hows and the whats of their mission. And we've got acquired over the years a number of pieces of guidance around leases, hiring agreements, etc., for property and things like that. We also have for 5 years now had a synod manse scheme whereby all the manses in this synod are managed by the synod. We're responsible for buying new ones, selling surplus ones, the maintenance of the operational manses, and so on and so forth. It's certainly one thing that has relieved a burden on local churches. I know in my own church's case, it about halved the length of our management committee when the manse was transferred into the synod manse scheme. We also actually now, partly because of the size of our groupings of churches, administer all our ministers' expenses through the synod. We're also close to completing some work to develop a shared employment model for local churches so that we will establish some legal entities whereby groups of churches can employ church-based workers, relieving that issue of accountability from local church elders, and the supporting guidance is more or less complete. And also importantly, a couple of years ago, we did a piece of facilitated research with our local churches, the research done by a group drawn from local churches into what they wanted synod to provide in the way of support. And we're still getting there in terms of doing some of that, but we know from that experience what churches are looking for, and employment was a key issue. So that's just a bit of background. The transformation role was partly inspired by this quote that I came across in an article about the decline of Christianity in the 2021 census, where the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor was quoted as saying, "Christianity isn't in decline as much as it is transforming." And a lot of what my role is about helping local churches to think through how, through using their resources, buildings, finance, etc., in different ways, and how the governance might need to be changed to shape that, we can use our resources in different ways, and particularly in how we use them differently in working with our local communities. And this quote from the forwards to the Theos report published last summer about the URC really sets a view about how this approach to community engagement is part of our DNA, part of the way we've operated as a church right from its inception, and what we're trying to do in terms of our strategy around a church with people at the margins is respond to that growing desire of local churches to work in community, but also to respond to a resolution that came to our synod about 18 months, 20 months ago, asking us to, in response to the poverty crisis, the cost of living crisis at that point, to focus our attention on those who are poverty experienced or otherwise marginalised, and to develop ways in which individual churches could take practical action to support that. One of the quick and easy things we did right at the start of that was to introduce a scheme of small grants up to £2,500 to support churches where they were making a commitment to an external partner or a national accreditation scheme, such as Places of Welcome, to open their churches to community organisations and community activities. Poverty is a really important issue in the synod area. 38 of our 104 church locations are found in the parishes that fall in the 10% most deprived areas of England. That's almost 4 in 10. There's a highest concentration, yes, in the urban areas of Greater Manchester, but actually it's those churches run from our most northerly synod, even north of even north of Carlisle, to some of our most southerly ones on the southern fringes of Manchester. There's not one cause. There's a variety of settings, former mill towns, urban estates, town and city centres. We still have quite a number of churches in traditional town or city centres. The coastal communities of Blackpool, Barrow, and indeed a church that is in a very, very rural location. So at our synod meeting in March, we agreed a strategy entitled A Church with People at the Margins. The choice of the word with is very deliberate. This is not about how we do things for or to people. This is about how we listen and engage with them in understanding their needs, their solutions, and thinking from that about how we respond. Central to this is a set of characteristics we'd like to encourage our churches to adopt. On one level, they are characteristics that are about how we behave as individual Christians and collectively as a church community. But actually, they are also things that it should influence the way in which we approach the development of our buildings and the use of resources. How in designing and thinking about our buildings, are we listening to the views of local people about what they want them to provide or how they could be provided? How are we engaging them in all aspects of the running of those buildings? How we are being generous in the use of the availability of our buildings to local community groups and others who are marginalised and poverty experienced. Central to this is the theme that Church Action on Poverty developed about enabling all people to live with dignity, agency, and power. So it is a strategy that asks us to think and focus on the most disadvantaged and marginalised in our community. It's a strategy that's about how we listen to the voices of those who are poverty experienced. But it is also focused on how we support and enable local churches to deliver solutions appropriate to their community and the feedback that they get from people in those communities. So our responsibilities as a synod are about how we provide support. We facilitate networks of churches exploring similar issues and similar needs. We're increasingly working with a number of partners in both the faith and charity sector. Beki is here from Housing Justice this evening. They're one of the charities we're working specifically with around issues of how we can provide affordable housing. But for example, from the faith sector, we've now become as a synod, a member of the Church Urban Fund's Together network, so that we can work more closely with colleagues in that group around a faith response to issues of poverty and marginalisation. It's also in responding to both the tend, but also the transform challenge from the marks of mission, about how we as a synod provide a prophetic challenge to injustices in our society. We're members of the Let's End Poverty campaign, which the URC nationally is also a member of, as are some of our individual churches. And a number of the images you may have seen in publicity around the banners that are being displayed by that campaign are on our local churches in our synod. So it's a further example of how we as a synod are trying to support and offer support to all local churches. Yes, our strategy sets a priority to give resources to churches serving our most deprived areas. But we recognise that every church serves communities that includes those who are poverty experienced and marginalised. So we want to make sure that all are in a position to respond to that. To finish by coming back to the Theos report, again from the forward, the church's place in a changing landscape is not solely understood by grasping the right statistics, but by the way it acts on the ground. I'm going to share a short film which has been made with the support and engagement of 4 of our local churches, which actually looks at how they, as churches, have sought to rethink their use of their buildings about and their plans and their thoughts in doing so.
Hi, I'm Mike Hart, Transformation Director of the URC's Northwestern Synod. I'm here to introduce this film about how our living stones can make a living church. The Northwestern Synod of the United Reformed Church has adopted a strategy called A Church with People at the Margins to guide its work. This strategy prioritises our mission to focus on working with people who are poverty experienced and marginalised in our local communities. This short film draws on the experience of 4 of our churches who are looking at how their buildings can be better used to support the needs of their particular communities. In these short pieces, we will explore motivations for the work and what this means for future life of the church with its local community. In the first 2 examples, we will explore changes that 2 of our local churches have already made to the use of their buildings to better engage with their community. Shortly, we will hear about a long-term partnership reflecting a lease for building use between a church and their local food bank. Firstly, we will visit a church who took the opportunity to remodel the front of their town centre church to develop their community cafe and place of welcome.
The idea was that we wanted to expand our role as a community church. Now, prior to this, the doors at the front of the church were solid oak and they were closed all week apart from an hour on a Sunday. If you were just an ordinary person travelling up and down the main road, you'd think we were closed. We decided we would go for glass doors, which we have. So now when we have things like these coffee mornings on and the other activities in here, people can actually walk, as they're walking down the road, they actually see it. They can see through, they can see and they can see the church is alive. And it's been a real success.
Initially, it was going forward in faith that we did really believe that because we were so committed to doing this for the community, we were sure that the money would come, and it did. But it was challenging. You know, Dave and I spent many an hour filling in grant application forms and just finding out as much as we possibly could about the funding. But that was okay because it paid off in the end and we got it. It's more than met anything we thought it was going to be. We just can't believe how successful it has been. People have come in, random individuals after COVID who had been isolated for so long, just wanted somewhere to go. Many of them have started to come to worship on a Sunday as well. Now that wasn't the original intention. The intention was to be open to the community, but the byproduct of that is that some of them have come, and on Easter Sunday this year we made 12 new members, which is just amazing.
The food bank was set up initially about 10 years ago. They'd received notice to quit from their last temporary accommodation. That was seen as an opportunity for our church to offer them a home effectively. We decided that we could offer them what was the annex, the building that you see here, and obviously we were delighted to be able to do so. Previous to that, this building, initially it had actually been a scout hut, And it then moved to becoming more of a drop-in centre for the homeless. So the drop-in centre moved to a small part of the church hall, freeing up this space, the annex, to enable the food bank to move in. The benefits, I think, operate for both sides of the agreement. And obviously the main one is certainty. For their clients, people knew where the food bank was rather than a somewhat itinerant existence they'd had before then. They could make adjustments to the premises to fit in with their operation as well. The church has the reassurance of knowing that the building is well cared for, is decorated, is looked after, is heated, and at no cost to the church. It's a very visible reminder to the congregation and to other people visiting the church of just the needs of so many people within society.
So we visited 2 partnerships between church and local community that are bearing fruits for both partners. For the second pair of churches, we will hear examples from projects that are still in their early stages of development, but are intended to leave a lasting legacy for the church in its local community. Firstly, we explore the motivations to develop a church to make better use of space for a smaller congregation and to free space to provide affordable housing in an area where this is at a premium for local families.
When the Ukrainian invasion first happened, there was a lot of conversation about whether we could use part of the building for refugees. So that started a conversation thinking about where we could use the space better and whether we can use it for some accommodation.
We felt it was important to respond to the local needs of the community, especially as a Lake District and Windermere at the moment. Many of the houses are unaffordable or go as second homes, and we felt by doing something useful in this way it would help the local population and certainly the young people get a step up on the housing ladder.
Longer term, it means we'll have a partner on the campus, which means that maintenance of the whole of the space, outdoors and in, will be shared, and we can right-size the building for our ongoing congregation, which means that we'll have a longer, better life here, witnessing as part of a faith community in this busy part of the world.
After COVID, there was so much need for relationships and support and encouragement. We really wanted to share values together. Now there are about 30 different groups and organisations that share the church building, and so it's a church and community hub.
Being in this building, we get a lot of support from the wider volunteers of the Dandelion group.
For me, God's work that we're doing is present every day because we're supporting people and helping people.
We quite substantially adapted our building. It just made sense. It's a shared operation on this site, and I think it's lovely because then we all share that responsibility together and that ownership around money and around buildings and around where are the gaps in what we offer together. I think it's really important to have a church and community and Christian presence in this part of Wythenshawe, in Woodhouse Park, because God is at work already, and part of the job of the church is to join in.
Dandelion is really helping us to see what church could be and what church could mean for the future. The understanding here is that it's not only that small worshipping community on a Sunday morning that's church. The spiritual and emotional and physical well-being of the community, that's church too.
Everybody who lives or works in this community in connection with the Dandelion community has a say in what this will look like next. So the physical space, don't know. Is it a whole rebuild or is it an adaptation? The vision is it will be a church and community hub with a better and improved space for people ahead.
We began our journey with a church which has literally opened its doors to welcome the community in. And we finished with a church exploring how they could, to all intents and purposes, hand their church building to the local community and to remain as a spiritual presence in that community building. In very real ways, all of these churches are using their buildings as living stones to ensure that a living Christian presence remained rooted with the people of their local community. responding to the needs of people at the margins. Every local church serves a particular community, but we hope that these examples will inspire other churches to see what is possible with imagination and an openness to be with people at the margins. Thank you.
Steve, thank you so much. What very rich presentation. My own brain is buzzing around with what my own local church might do in response to that. So what we're going to get you to do now is to go into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes and just have a think about some of the things that you've heard, some of your reflections. We won't be answering questions immediately after that. We're going to go straight into our second speaker. But I will now put you into your breakout, so when it pops up, do accept. Somebody's just asked whether or not they can have a recording. Yes, it will be shared with you after the webinar, and also will be on the Buildings Forum webpage. So yes, indeed, we will do that for you.
Welcome back from the breakout rooms. Hope you found that useful. What we'd encourage you to do in the next 5 minutes, please, is to record any comments, any questions, any reflections from your group, the discussion you've just had, maybe something from the presentation that Mike gave us. And please write them into the chat. As Lindsay's already said, we will collate these, we will summarize them without referring to any individual name, and then respond where appropriate and send those back out to you. So please, this is your opportunity to put things into the chats in the next 4 minutes. If you need to get up and have a wriggle, please do, but we will be starting promptly again at 8:20. So it's literally 3 minutes to write any thoughts, reflections into the chat, please.
Thank you, everybody. Lots of lovely comments in there. We're now going to move to Beki Winter, who is a housing enabler with Housing Justice, and I'm sure we'll say a bit more about her role and what she does. But thank you very much, Beki, for joining us.
Just mute. Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you for having me this evening. I'll just share my screen. And can you now see? Yeah, Faith and Affordable Housing. So I'm just going to let you know who I am, what my project's all about, why I think it's relevant for the United Reformed Church, and then I'm going to show you some examples of churches that have done housing and some live examples at the moment. My project started just over 2 years ago in England off the back of the Archbishop's Commission on Housing, Church and Community, which kicked off in 2019. We've been running Faith in Affordable Housing in Wales for many years, longer, and very successfully. But in England, we, as I say, we started off the back of this because Housing Justice was particularly involved in that commission. And the commission concluded that we should be building better communities and homes, not just houses. And houses should be sustainable, safe, stable, sociable and satisfying. Following the commission, they published the Coming Home report. Many of you may have heard of that. And they also passed a motion that stated that the housing crisis harms all society and responding to housing need is an integral part of the mission and ministry of the Church of England, particularly insofar as it affects the poorest and most marginalised. So that sort of kick-started the project. But as I say, we were working in Wales before that, working with all the denominations, particularly the United Reformed Church. The main aims of my project are to support a caseload of affordable housing that will be moving forward to planning and development. So supporting individual churches through the process of developing affordable homes. And when I say affordable homes, just to sort of elaborate on that, affordable in its literal sense is anything up to 80% of market rate. But in many communities, such as in London, 80% of market rate isn't particularly affordable. So we do try wherever possible to aim for social rent, which is more like 50% of market rent. But there are other tenure types, such as shared ownership and discount market value. We're also aiming to support systemic change within the church structures to facilitate more affordable house building and to significantly improve the skills and knowledge of local decision makers around the development of affordable housing on church land. So we do things like guides and support policies that enable affordable housing development. And we basically try and find what the challenges are within the hierarchies of the church and try and find solutions to those. The way I work with individual churches, because I'm a community-led housing advisor, is I go through the 5 stages, which is group, who are the people that are going to be working on this, the site, what is the site capable of delivering, whether that's the church site or whether it's a car park or a piece of land nearby, and then making a plan for what the steps are that we're going to take forward, finding the right partners to help, and then in the building and then living. And I encourage churches to play a role in the development post building as well. The reason I think it's important for United Reformed Church is that, and these will be distributed afterwards, so I won't necessarily read every word of this, but it's essentially the United Reformed Church believes Christians are called to stand beside those in poverty. And we've heard some of that from Mike in the policy that strategy they've approved, as well as challenge the structures and injustices which allow poverty to persist. So it's something that I believe is part of the mission and ministry of the United Reformed Church. And as we've heard from Mike, it's something that I think you'd all agree is important for us to be considering in terms of your assets and what you can do. JPIT, as you may know, has 6 hopes for society, and I've picked out 3 that I think are relevant to this. A society where the poorest and most marginalised are at the centre, a just economy that enables the flourishing of all life, and a planet where our environment is renewed. So the reason that last one is in there is because the housing developments that we do, or we encourage to do, are always at a higher level of sustainability. We're expecting the homes that are built are going to be done in a way that are energy efficient and contribute to tackling climate change. And also sometimes the surplus hall or car park or space that you have might actually produce a capital receipt that you could use to make your building more sustainable or create a more appropriate building room, multifunction space that you can use, which is easier to heat and better for the environment. So ticking lots of boxes. The United Reformed Church in Wales, the National Synod of Wales, are actually leading the way with all this. Back in 2014, they produced a policy, an affordable housing policy, and they amended their charitable objectives to enable more affordable housing delivery on church land. And this is just a nice quote from Chris Atherton, the Synod Treasurer. He said, "Our churches are called to serve the community and to provide a tangible legacy." And so in Wales, they've done one scheme with us. I think they've done about 3 schemes prior to that. And the scheme they did with us, which I'll just show you in a second, is also a passive house scheme. So it's a scheme that is the highest level of energy efficiency that you can achieve. And they've got another 3 developments underway at the moment. So this development in North Wales was one that we supported the URC Wales Synod on, and you can see in 2019 planning permission was granted, and in 2022 the new homes were completed. 6 new homes, and I visited the village sometime last year, and the people in those homes are already part of the community. It was really welcome development. There was no NIMBYs. It was all really well supported, and it was just a lovely scheme for the United Reformed Church to do. It was a full site redevelopment. Was that one? These examples are not URC, but it just gives you a flavour of what can be achieved. This is in Keswick, so I live in South Cumbria, so that's a lot of the examples are local to me, and of course Mike's presenting from the northwest. Southey Court in Keswick is a Methodist church. You can see on the right there the Methodist church, and they had a large hall at the back, which was surplus to requirement. There was a lot of asbestos, and they needed some money to renovate the existing church and make it more suitable and sustainable for going forward. So 4 super sustainable energy efficient homes have been built by the local community land trust in exchange for a capital sum, which, as I say, helped renovate the church. And here's some more pictures of the 4 homes for local people. And there's Bill Bewley, who is the chair of the community land trust, who was leading on that project. This is Wesley Court in Ambleside, another Methodist church. Here, 14 homes have been built within the fabric of the existing building. Many of the original features were kept. It's a beautiful building. The church had decided that they wanted to sell the building to a housing association. It was Home Group in this instance, and the capital receipt was used to fund what is now the Ambleside Parish Centre, which is where they worship from. That's an ecumenical partnership with the Anglicans, so that was on the Anglican land, so that's half Methodist, half Anglican, that parish centre, and it's a really important community centre for everyone now as well. Just a little example there of alternative uses for churches. This is also in Ambleside, and whilst it's retained the beautiful church, it's maybe not necessarily what we need in Ambleside, but just something for you to think of there about what you might want as the legacy for your church. There are other options. And just to show that it's not all in high land value areas, this is Church Road in St Anne's, where again the Methodist Church there had a large surplus area of land and building, but what they needed was to improve their existing services. They also run a food bank and cafe from their premises, so they wanted to improve that and make it more accessible. So you can see here, this is the old hall, and that building there was what we needed renovation, and the building in the bottom right there is the connection that needed to be accessible and more inviting. And there's images of the new housing, which was done with, I believe that one was Great Places. So a few examples there. And as you've heard, down on the left there is Carver and Windermere. I'm supporting the church there. And on the right is an example of the Headlands in Northampton, which is also being supported through Faith in Affordable Housing. So those are my details, and I would welcome anyone getting in touch and just exploring what might be possible for their church.
Becky, thank you so much. Again, really inspiring stories, and I'm sure we can all see our own church buildings and what might be possible and what's been done in the past, and buildings near us as well. We're going to pop you back into breakout rooms for a little bit shorter this time, I think. Just check. Yes, for 10 minutes this time. Again, just to reflect on what you've heard, whether or not it's something that your church might be interested in, or churches near you, or something you could partner with other denominations, and then we'll come back for a plenary session. So as always, do respond by ticking the box.
This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome back. Thank you very much. We're now going to go into a period of sort of 10-15 minutes for your reflections, comments, thoughts about what you've heard from Mike and Becky, but also Miles Dunnett is back with us. Miles was with us in part one, and he's back with us. And just to remind you, he's the programme manager for the Church Life Review. So if you have questions or comments for Miles as well, especially in the context of what we've heard today. And also Steve Summers, who's the URC's Head of Community Engagement, has also volunteered to field and answer questions. I can't see Steve at the moment. I'm assuming he's there. But do please wave a hand, either virtually or actually, and we will try and field your questions.
Lindsay, shall I start?
Yeah, Mike, if you wanted to pick up on the comment you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so I was just looking through the chat from earlier, and there's a comment from Craig Muir about needing to find ways to work and support churches before it becomes too late. And that's certainly our experience. It's in a sense, it's one of the genesis of my role. Was a church that had closed, and then a month after it closed said, oh, but there's all these really good things that are going on in our building that we can't do anymore. And we said, well, okay, but why didn't you tell us 12 months before you closed, and we might have been able to work with you to do something about it. And if you think about certainly the last two churches we saw in the film, they are both about looking at declining or small congregations and how the work with the community can be sustained, for the longer term. So that's a really important point, is not waiting till the last minute to try and do that creative thinking.
Thanks, Mike. Mark, you've got a question for us. Mark Hayes.
Yes, perhaps I could just pick up on the last point, which wasn't what I was going to talk on, but I think the process for closing churches should include a moment of reflection as to what else could this building do. The congregation might be going, but there is so much else that might happen. And I've seen a church fairly near to me close that I really think could have had a future, but there was no one there to do it and no opportunity to do it. And occasionally I've heard people say, oh, if only they'd approached us. We've got some people at our church who live there and they might have got involved. There seems to be I know everyone's stretched and it's difficult, but I just think that would be helpful. I just wanted to say, as someone who used to run a housing association, do look at housing. Churches are often in places where they can meet particular needs, both general housing and sometimes more specialist, particularly about young people. But also, I think the denomination needs to streamline its processes around this. It's not just the United Reformed Church, but all the churches do, because being on the other side of the fence in a number of situations, it can be very difficult to work with all the different bits of churches that you end up. And it's quite often as the partner, you end up having to steer the thing through the church organisation to get it to happen. And it would be worth reflecting on how the United Reformed Church could offer a sort of easy route through all the things you need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks. David Thompson, please. You're on mute at the moment, Dave. That's it.
Muted again.
I noticed in the previous session that the Wales Synod had added the provision of housing to its charitable objectives. And it struck me that this is actually quite an important step to take, not least because the Charity Commission and the kind of approach that they would take if something wasn't specifically in charitable objectives. And I simply wondered whether there was any general legal advice on this denominationally, rather than getting everybody, every synod, to have to do it on its own, which is perfectly possible, but it just takes longer.
Yes,
thank you, David. I was going to say, Becky, please do respond. Yes.
Yeah. So we've produced a guide with Wrigley solicitors for PCCs, for Anglican churches, but a lot of the information within that is still useful for all churches of all denominations. So please do go to Faith and Affordable Housing website, and you'll find the Wrigley's guide there. But in the Northwestern Synod, we're supporting Mike, and who've chosen Anthony Collins solicitors to do something similar, to look at a guide specific for the United Reformed Church. And I imagined that it will also be relevant for any synod. The charitable edition makes it easier for Wales, but they did do disposals prior to that. And the charity law, because we've spoken to Charity Commission and we've done quite a lot of work on this, if it's within the mission of ministry of the church, they see that as their missional purpose is to tackle poverty, and they see the housing crisis as part of that mission of ministry, then it's okay within Charity Commission rules to sell at an undervalue to another charitable organisation. So, a housing association that is charitable, that could be a good choice if you see it as part. So I'm no legal advisor, but it is possible within charity law to do it, but it isn't easy. So yeah, as I say, I refer you to the guide that we've created, and as I say, Mike's doing another one.
And Mike, I think it's fair to say, isn't it? There's also discussions exactly what you're asking about, David, in terms of how can this be for the URC as a whole that we're working through.
Yeah.
Over to Jim Robertson, please, for a question.
Just to keep me right, Beki, I think one of the challenges that came out of the Archbishop of Canterbury's commission was the possibility that there might be good theological reasons in some situations for the church to gift the land where there's need and not necessarily see it as an income generating thing. And I don't think at the time that this pleased the church commissioners at the highest level, but certainly a friend of mine, Chris Beals, who you may, the late Chris Beals, was very much an advocate, and if one takes the Tyne Valley, then if the land was gifted, because the ownership of church land and private ownership across the valley is huge, which certainly affects capacity to build, in terms of response to housing need. But what about this notion of the churches actually gifting the land as a theological rationale?
I mean, I would agree that it should be a theological rationale. The thing with the Church of England is that each land holding is under different charitable objectives. So the church commissioners and the dioceses that have glebe land, as I understand it, that land is under the charitable objectives to be income generating. Like the purpose of the charity is to generate income for stipend fund or vicars' pensions, or all these kind of things. So they are financially driven. Whereas the PCCs, the individual church trustees, have different charitable objectives, so it's easier for them to be more flexible with the land that that they have. Although the diocese is the custodian, so different lands, different rules. But I mean, I would agree with you in theory. But what we are working with the church commissioners on is rural exception sites. So they've identified 70 sites across England that could be 100% affordable schemes. And I'm connecting them with rural housing enablers across the country to see which ones we can bring forward. And it's still a work in progress, the conversation around land use. The people that were behind the commission, Chris Beals obviously being one of them, the late Chris Beals, but the people that are still behind that are keen to take another motion to synod so that we can change the rules so that they're not so driven by financial value, and it can be social value as well.
Thank you.
David again, please. Thank you.
I was simply going to observe that nothing that affects the Church of England will make any difference to nonconformist land, because that is the categorical difference between the Church of England and the non-established churches.
Thank you, David. Indeed. Probably got time for one more question. I'm looking through the chat, and there's some very useful and valid questions that we will have to come back to you with some of the queries. We'll respond later. But any last question? In that case, I think it's back to Lindsay, please. Oh, who is that, please?
Paul Bedford.
Okay, Paul, please. Yes, your final question.
Could we just have a reprise, I think, from Beki about that parish centre that was built? And if I heard it right, it was multi-denominational contributions into that building. And I'd be just interested to know whether I got that right.
Yes, the Ambleside Parish Centre, it was half Anglican, half Methodist funded, and run by the community. I mean, Cumbria is the ecumenical county, so they, yeah, it's quite, yeah, it's the right place for that to happen, but there's no reason why it can't happen elsewhere.
Elizabeth, please. Elizabeth Welsh. Thank you.
Yeah, I just thought I'd make a point that I go on making, which is where I think we need to address more the question about growing the faith and growing the church rather than accepting decline, which too often seems to be the case. And you know, I thought those first examples of community involvement were really wonderful. And how do we actually share the faith in a positive way rather than buy into the sort of diffidence and sense that, oh my goodness me, we're not in a country that believes anymore, so we can't say anything about what we believe, which seems to affect some churches. So I think, as well as growing what we do, I think we need to grow what we believe and how we sense God actually leading us into ways that we might not yet know about. So I thought I'd just mention that towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's a wonderful final comment. Indeed, flourishing communities, flourishing neighbourhoods, flourishing churches. There's a strong correlation between all of those and living life in all the fullness in terms of demonstrating God's love in action. So yes, indeed. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. Lindsay, to you, please.
Thank you, Elizabeth, as well. And I was just thinking the same thing, that's exactly what these examples seem to be, wasn't it? It's like an outworking of God's love for us, and how then somebody used an expression recently in a meeting I was in, that transformed lives transform communities. And it was an all one sentence thing, but I loved that. When our lives are transformed, then we can, you know, be part of that sort of ripple effect, if you like. I also wanted to pick up on, who spoke just before Elizabeth? It was Paul, wasn't it? And something that Beki said. I'm a big believer in working ecumenically. I mean, we so many of our local communities, but each of us individually on our own are often in a situation where we can't do this stuff on our own. We either don't have the people, financial resources, land, buildings, but together there are so many examples of fantastic things happening. So do talk to your local church partners where you are about what's going on for them as well, because there are all sorts of tiny and huge exciting examples of work that's going on. I just want to really thank Mike and Beki particularly this evening for your contributions. I found it really, really enthusing and inspiring, and we will make available all the various things that they've shared with us. It may take us a couple of days. There is a Buildings Forum website, and so certain things will go up on there as well. So watch out for that. Before we say goodbye today, our next webinar will be on it will be continuing on our conversations about eco-church, so picking those conversations up again, and particularly to do with land use, which we've started talking about this evening. And it will be on November the 12th, and it will be a daytime webinar this time. We do try and alternate them, so it will be 11:30 in the morning till 1 o'clock on November the 12th. So save the date, and we will look forward to seeing as many of you as can make it then. Meanwhile, we're a little bit early, look at us. But shall we do our usual and unmute ourselves and share the grace with one another? May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.